Daniel, welcome to the programme.
Thank you so much for having me.
Are we witnessing a return to all-out war?
We are seeing a return to Israeli military action in Gaza for the simple reason that the Hamas terrorist army refuses to agree to a deal that will see the release of every Israeli hostage that it has been holding for a year and a half and the end of Hamas's rule in Gaza. Right now, Hamas is the government of Gaza, and we cannot see a reality where the Hamas government of Gaza remains the government of Gaza while it promises to carry out more massacres like it did on October 7th until Israel is destroyed.
As we're speaking to you, Daniel, we're getting news that the Israeli military say that sirens have sounded in several areas of Israel after a projectile was launched from Yemen. Could it be said that Israel is responsible for an escalation of conflict in the region?
I don't think that would be a reasonable thing to say, that Israel is responsible for an escalation, for the simple reason that the Hamas terrorist army in the Gaza Strip continues to hold hostages that it took from Israel on October 7th, 2023. It's holding them underground, chaining them, torturing them, starving them, and at the same time insisting that it's going to carry out more massacres until Israel is destroyed. The Houthi pirate army in Yemen has decided to enter this war on the side of Hamas. The Houthis in Yemen saw what Hamas did on October 7th and wanted to side with Hamas, and to do so they have closed the Red Sea to international shipping, and they have fired ballistic missiles across the state of Israel. So I don't think Israel is responsible for the escalation. I think Hamas and the Iranian regime and its proxy armies are responsible for waging war, and Israel is simply trying to defend itself.
Yeah, I suppose there is great concern at the demise of the ceasefire at this point, isn't there? In terms of where things go from here and how escalation could spiral or indeed could be contained at this point. The UN has said that these strikes on Gaza are unconscionable. There was a real optimism that the ceasefire could hold. Why has that been allowed to deteriorate by both sides?
The reason that the ceasefire has deteriorated, Israel has been very clear about. If Hamas wants a ceasefire, it needs to release all of the hostages that it's been holding and give up power. We cannot allow a situation where the terrorist army that invaded Israel with thousands of men, they went house to house, burning families in their homes. They gunned down hundreds of people in a music festival, and they returned to Gaza, which is walking distance from these areas. They remain in Gaza, where they're holding hostages and calling for more massacres until Israel is destroyed. So I'm very concerned that Hamas remains in power. I'm very concerned that Hamas is holding hostages, and I hope that the entire world will call on Hamas to end the war that it started, release the hostages, and allow a new government to take power in Gaza that will choose peace instead of war.
Could it be said that Netanyahu has chosen war instead of peace, and actually a new government of Israel might be able to release the slight logjam in which we find ourselves now?
Well, anything can be said. We have to ask if it's reasonable to say it.
Sure.
Hamas terror regime in Gaza is holding hostages
Yeah.
in underground terror dungeons. That is a choice that Hamas is making, and Hamas is not allowed to make this choice without consequences. Hamas is also remaining as the government of Gaza. The Palestinian representative to the UN that you cited, he has not called on Hamas to give up power in Gaza. He has not called on Hamas to give up the hostages. This is also very concerning. So I don't think this is because of Netanyahu's decision. I think it's because of the situation we find ourselves in, where walking distance from Israeli villages, there is a terrorist army that is holding hostages and promising to carry out more massacres until Israel is destroyed.
Yeah. Let me put to you some of the UK politics around this as well, Daniel, which today kind of escalated somewhat as well, where Downing Street rejected the Foreign Secretary David Lammy's assessment that Israel had broken international law by blocking aid to Gaza. So David Lammy said that Benjamin Netanyahu's government he was accusing them of starving children, saying they were committing war crimes. Number 10 have instead sort of clarified, I suppose, or, disagreed to some extent with David Lammy, saying that Israel's actions in Gaza are at clear risk of breaching international humanitarian law. What do you make of that back and forth within the UK government?
Well, we're in a very difficult situation. As I said, Hamas remains the government of Gaza, and therefore any aid, any food and supplies that Israel facilitates the transfer of into Gaza, Hamas is going to be the first recipient of this cargo, and Hamas is going to tax the cargo, and it's going to use that money to fund its terrorist army and to pay the people who are holding hostages and to recruit new members to its terrorist army. So Israel is under no legal obligation to ensure that Hamas has the means to continue existing and funding its terrorist army. What Israel is trying to do is send a message that the Hamas terrorist army cannot be the government of Gaza, and it should not be there receiving the food and supplies that generous international donors are sending in. But this is what's happening. Hamas is the recipient of the food and supplies that are being sent into Gaza, and it's using the tax revenue from these food and supplies to continue waging war. So it's common sense to try to put a stop to your enemy's ability to wage war. That's what I see as happening.
Yeah, I think my final question, Daniel, is that today it's reported by the Hamas-run health ministry that more than 400 people were killed by these Israeli airstrikes. There was a suggestion from Hamas that perhaps 5 senior officers, officials, terrorists had been killed in these strikes. Is that worth it? Is that the price that has to be paid? 400 plus people for 5 Hamas terrorists?
I'm first of all skeptical of the numbers that Hamas uses, because it is the same Hamas government of Gaza that is calling for the destruction of Israel that is feeding these numbers, and they do not distinguish at all between Hamas fighters and civilians. As far as the necessary price, this is a question to ask Hamas and the Palestinian people of Gaza. Is it worth it for your government to continue holding hostages? This is a barbaric practice to hold hostages, to torture them and starve them. The question needs to be asked of the Hamas government and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which is its rival. Will you call on this war to end by demanding that Hamas give up power and release the hostages?
Daniel Rubenstein, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.